Imagine taking two of the greatest space games of all time, the turn-based strategy game Galactic Civilizations 2 and the real-time strategy game Homeworld. Imagine then merging them into one single game, because that is pretty much exactly what Ironclad has managed to do with Sins of a Solar Empire. Sins has the size, the scope and the depth of a TBS, but it all plays out in glorious real time, and it is literally the birth of a new genre. The first thing you have to understand is the scale of the game. A 1-star game with perhaps 10 planets will take you between 1 and 2 hours to play, but a 10-star game with 100 planets could take you well over 20 hours, and with the extremely easy to use Galaxy Editor, you're able to build galaxies with hundreds of stars and over 1,000 planets. You can zoom right in on the smallest of ships and take in the amazing model detail, and you can zoom out in stages all the way to see your entire galaxy. And the first thing you may be asking is, how could a real-time strategy game work on such an epic scale? And the truth is, it just can't, because Sins isn't a real-time strategy game. It's better described as a real-time representation of a turn-based strategy game. In the larger games, you'll have up to perhaps 300 ships spread out over several fleets fighting battles all over the galaxy. Specific unit control and micromanagement just could not work on such a huge scale. And you can switch all AI assistance off and set your ships into hold ground mode and manually control every ship's every move, but when you're engaging enemies in a different star system and one of your planets elsewhere is attacked by pirates, for example, it's good to know that you can focus on the more important battle and let the AI handle everything else. And handle it well. The AI is quite wonderful, it really takes good care of you. While the game is always going to be compared with Homeworld, it's not Homeworld. Unit positioning isn't going to win you battles, micromanagement won't win you battles, only a few ships even have clicky abilities, and these are all automatic by default. How many actions per minute you can perform won't win you battles, and neither will how efficient your build queue is. What will win you battles is how you build your empire, how you build your fleets, which technologies you have, and where and when you choose to engage in battle, and your overall strategic approach. The most noticeable thing about Sins when you first fire up the game is just how sleek and intuitive everything is. There's a wonderful menu on the title screen side of things which is very easily navigable, and the UI on the in-game side is just astounding. You can play an entire game without seeing a single spaceship, if you like. The Empire Manager makes large-scale ship control a breeze, as fleets, groups, and the ability to set units to assist each other just makes things simple. As does a search function which lets you track down specific ships anywhere in the galaxy. Ironclad's online service is also an absolute pleasure to use. It's extremely stable, navigating the lobbies and available games is simple, a friend list makes playing with friends easier, setting up games with custom maps is just a few clicks. Given the epic scope of the game, you really need to be able to save the game online, and thankfully you can. So those insane 50-hour games, you can go and play those online and just save the game and just resume later on. There isn't much of a story to speak of, there's no single player campaign, everything you play will be skirmish, much like the Civilization games, but it works fine in Civ and it works fine in Sins. A brief intro sequence gets us up to speed on the three factions in the game. There's a human faction, there's an alien faction, and there's an evil human faction. Much like Supreme Commander, while the basic ship designs differ, the ships themselves are mostly pretty much the same in terms of the roles that they fulfill. It's the technology trees that most distinctly separate the different factions. When you first fire up a game, you'll start out with one planet, and your first goal will be to get a small economy set up, to get your flagship out, and to get a small fleet up and running, and then begin scouting and colonising nearby planets and asteroids. You may notice fairly opaque rings circling each celestial body. These are gravity wells. It's within these that ships can move freely, and only within these, which means that all combat happens in specific space around planets, which keeps things coherent and manageable instead of having ships wandering in the vast depths of space. There are also lines connecting the different celestial bodies known as phase streams. It's through these that ships travel. Ordering your ships to move into one of these will send it zooming automatically across to the next celestial body on a slight time delay, which roughly represents a turn in a turn-based strategy game. You'll have three economic resources to deal with. There's metal, crystal and money. Metal and crystal you get by mining asteroids which orbit planets, but both can be bought on the black market if you like. How much money you have is determined by your taxes, which is determined by how many planets you have and their respective populations and development levels. You can also earn money through your trade networks, which works in a very similar way to the Civilization games, but is more automated, or you can earn money through selling your other resources on the black market. You'll do very little building in the game, and if you prefer you can even set the AI to handle building locations for you. Each planet or asteroid you've colonised has so many slots for logistics buildings, which contribute towards your trade and culture, or for tactical buildings, which are all oriented towards military elements. And this limited slot count means you'll have to choose carefully how you plan out your planets. Building too many defences means fewer trade hubs or research stations, and your planet may be well defended, but it won't be contributing towards your economy or your research. Once you have a small base and fleet established at your homeworld, you want to begin exploring and colonising. Exploration is easy because scouts, which can even be automated, can quickly explore large chunks of the map, but colonisation is a little tougher. Most colonisable bodies are defended by non-aggressive neutrals who will defend their territory but never leave it. This gives early colonisation a slow pace as you try and break down minor fleets, and it makes rushing literally impossible even on a small map. And you'll also have pirates to contend with. Pirates are easily comparable with the barbarians in the Civilization games, except there's a brilliant bounty mechanic in play. The pirates will attack whoever holds the highest bounty. This means you'll often find yourself either fighting off pirates or dumping all your cash into making sure that your enemies have to deal with them instead. As cool and engrossing as the empire building side of the game is, this is also a space combat game. And what would a space combat game be without great combat? Thankfully, the battles are an absolute pleasure to watch. You'll have epic battles between huge fleets, you'll have tiny little bombers assaulting crews as well. Fighters rally to defend them, you'll have larger frigates forming lines, bombarding enemy vessels as the larger steel cruisers and the monolithic capital vessels duke it out. There are laser weapons and gauss weapons and iron cannons and ballistic rockets, and it all just looks spectacular as it comes together. Some of the larger ships have gun batteries all over the place, and it's just a pleasure to watch them unleash death in all directions. Ironclad has compared the visual style of the combat with Babylon 5, and it's a good comparison. But you should know that Sins is absolutely not an RTS. As I said before, it's much more like a real-time representation of a turn-based game. If everything I've said so far seems so academic and boring, it's because it is. This isn't an action game with big explosions everywhere and high action all over the place. The battles do look magnificent, but in a 2-hour game you might be spending less than 20 minutes fighting. Visually, the game is pretty spectacular. It scales down well, first off, so the machine's perhaps even 3 years old, done it quite well. But if you do have modern hardware, you can expect some just spectacular visuals. The ship models are extremely detailed, the effects are great. The game is also just impossibly serene. It's just beautiful to look at. The nebulae are jaw-dropping, the space backdrops are just fantastic. There's also a great orchestral score backing everything perfectly. All of the sound effects are very appropriate and add greatly to the feel of the game. And the game is also extremely well optimised. It runs very well on old and new hardware, and the level of zoom at both ends of the spectrum makes that seem all the more spectacular. And it plays well in a window as well, which is great because it's really the kind of game where you'll sit down to play and it's Tuesday afternoon, and at your next glance at the clock it's still afternoon, but suddenly it's Friday. The AI is mostly pretty impressive, which is not really surprising because this game is as much about empire management as it is about anything else. But that said, it will surprise you on occasion. It will launch sneak attacks on your planets while your forces are engaged elsewhere. Even on medium it can be a pretty tough challenge. That said, in games like this is an online game. You're always going to get your best experience online, but it does have a very solid single player game as well for anyone who just doesn't want to or can't play online. Sins is the birth of a genre. It's the first RT4X game, and it's done it better than I could have ever imagined. It plays extremely well, it runs extremely well, it looks extremely good. If you like turn-based strategy, if you like real-time strategy, if you like space games, if you like games in general, you want this game. Of course, that said, no review will be complete without at least a few complaints. So this review is incomplete.